Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to our 84th Right and Left Discussion Forum. We hold our panel discussions twice monthly to encourage open-minded discussions on the issues of the day. We attempt to show the educational value of carefully listening to those with whom we disagree. Today, our panel will discuss the impact of multiple political parties on presidential elections. Today's panel, beginning on my left, is Jerry Ritzman, chairman of the board of Ritzman Pharmacies. On his left is Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist. On his left is Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services. And on his left is Patty Haskins, retired math teacher and member of the Wadsworth City Council. Some people think that third-party candidates do nothing but take votes away from the candidates whose positions are closest to their own, thus giving the election to the opposition. Others think that third parties represent opinions that would not otherwise be heard. Jerry, where do you come down on this topic?
Well, I think that the third-party candidates offer a positive thing to the American political scene. The most recent one that we were familiar with is that made a big splash was
Ross Perot,
and that was where, in the 90s?
Yes.
And I don't even know what party he ran under.
The Independent Party.
The Independent Party. He got 20% of the votes, is that right?
Actually, it was 18.9.
Yeah, 18.9. And then what, and who
Second
won
time,
that election?
8.4.
Yeah, who won
No
that
electoral
election?
votes, though.
No electoral vote, but who won that election then?
Clinton?
Yeah, and then without Ross Perot, it could have been a different outcome, because most of Perot's supporters probably were Republican. And some of his ideas, I think, probably had to get infused in or made the Republican Party think, hey, there's people out here that agree with this. We need to maybe examine these ideas and change them. I don't, this year, Bernie Sanders, was he truly a Democrat, or was he something else? And he got some of his ideas at least looked at, or at least it appears as if they've given them some consideration in the Democratic platform. I would consider him more of a third-party candidate than a Democrat.
I agree with that.
Look back at.
Well, he called himself a socialist. I think.
Yeah, I mean, and what about who was Eugene Debs? Was he a socialist?
He was socialist. Yeah.
Did he run for president, or
he always does.
Well, this was how long ago? Long time
election,
ago.
1912.
Yeah. Okay.
Won
then-
3% of the vote.
and who? There were some guys in the 30s that ran as socialists and so forth.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of their ideas may have been adopted by one of the major parties, and maybe have become law and national policy. So yes, they do.
By presenting new ideas.
By presenting new ideas, by shaking up the establishment within the parties that do, that may not want to change. But the numbers then, when there's an outpouring for those folks, they make them think about that just because they want to win. And then I don't know what the libertarians are going to do this year.
Do you know what ideas they might be putting out that could be adopted?
Ideas, I think it's more in general, whether it's more involvement in individuals' lives or support, or less government. On the other hand, it would be less government intervention, even more extremes of deregulation and so forth than the major parties.
The Libertarians,
so they do.
Even on the ballot in Ohio? I understood that they were not.
They're on in all 50 states. The
They are.
Libertarians are, and I
Okay.
think the Green Party is on in 37?
Yeah.
Something
At
like
least.
that.
Yeah. I think Gary Johnson in Ohio is going to be on the ballot, but he won't be able to be identified as a libertarian.
Oh, really?
Yeah, something to do with some of the rules. He will be on the ballot.
Well, I found some interesting stuff. I told John earlier that I relearned some history and I learned some new stuff. I did find a chart. This only went up to 2004 with Ralph Nader. But there have been a couple of things that have happened when you say major parties have incorporated some of the independents, and that's been true. On the other hand, there have been a couple of occasions when there have been another sort of response. When George Wallace won 13.5% of the vote and 46 electoral votes, the most blatantly racist candidate probably in our history. This made the Democrats and the Republicans and the power brokers that support them begin to set up the present rules that we have that make it increasingly difficult for third parties to get on the ballot. Number of signatures. Ross Perot had enough money that he could, of his own, that he could get around that. But there's been a diminishing in the number of independent parties that can get on. So I read about that, and I found one site by a group called the Constitution Party, who I don't think is on the ballot anywhere this year, but they were in past years. And their comment was that the power brokers on both sides are been very worried about third parties and have made it increasingly difficult. Now that's, coming from a party that says they want to go back to what the founders thought about the Constitution and go work with that. So that's a whole other topic. That's a whole other topic. Yeah. But yeah, so there's been that. There's been the idea of incorporating things, and I think that's a good thing. As you're right, I think Bernie Sanders is an independent candidate. It just happened to, correspond a lot with what the Democrats want, and the Democrats are going to embrace some of that. And in the party, they've taken on some of those things in the party planks. So that's been true, and the other true has been the reaction by the, quote, the establishment against the independents. Mm-hmm. So.
Now, when did Nader run?
Nader was
2000.
That was 2000 and 2004. First the Reform Party and then the Green Party.
Okay, now had he not run, Al Gore would have been elected president.
Very likely. Very likely. So that's the spoiler effect.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So is that a good outcome or a bad outcome? Well, it depends.
Who knows? It depends. It depends. Yeah. Who knows? It's hard to speculate on.
Do you say hooray for Ralph Nader?
Run, Ralph, run.
Right.
Well, we might have stayed out of Afghanistan and Iraq. Who knows?
Well, okay. That would be another topic. Bryan,
yeah.
where are you on this?
Well, I agree. We need to shake it up. This election has probably, for me, been this election cycle the most disappointing of all the years that I voted. And I just think there has to be something to create a difference in the way we do things in this country, and it's not happening in the Republican Party and it's not happening in the Democratic Party. I think both candidates are flawed to the extent that neither one, if there was a credible third party candidate, it would really create an opening for some different thinking. And we've mentioned power brokers, people that are pulling the strings for these people. I think both parties need to wake up, and they need to be more in tune with what individuals really want, and it's not happening. I can only speak for the Republican Party where we're at today. I think it's going to be a mess. And once Mr. Trump gets done burning down the party, there probably will be a third party come out of the GOP, whether they latch on to the Constitutionalist Party. There are two. The Libertarians have Gary Johnson, which you mentioned, and there's another gentleman who's running. His name is Evan McMillan. I think he's only he just came out. Yeah. Sharp young man. I think he might be on right now 5 or 6 states. They're really trying and pushing, and he's pulling in a lot of independents, a lot of Bernie supporters, disaffected folks in the GOP party, and so we really need to do something, because I think the two-party system is broken and it needs to be fixed. And sometimes to fix it, you need to have some competitive forces, to work against it and to get people to wake up.
In Cleveland, I think the mayor elections are nonpartisan, aren't they? The candidates don't declare any party at all. It's just the person that gets the most votes, and there's
There are a lot of elections like that on local levels.
Are there?
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, independents are really sort of a third party
Yeah.
because you have to get the independents. Both parties need to get the independents involved and to moderate their messages. You know, we always talk about the pivot. You'll start seeing that after Labor Day. A lot of the messages will become a more mainstream because you cannot win an election with just your base. And it's true from local politics to county to state to federal. You have to go and have a moderate tone because the independent is really what puts that person in the office.
Looking back at the Tea Party, don't you think that that was really an independent party that was smart enough not to run as an independent party?
Yeah, they were. They started out with a great message, but then,
Well,
you know,
again, your definition.
yeah. Well,
Oh,
I mean,
small government and free
small
enterprise. That was
government,
their
free
message.
enterprise.
Yeah.
You know, a reform of the tax code, things that a lot of people could agree upon. But then all of a sudden, it took a hard right, and you know that just doesn't play well.
I don't know exactly what the Tea Party stands for. I only know what other people say the Tea Party stands for, and that most of the time it's an
Taxed
exaggeration.
enough already.
I'm not sure they even know
Yeah.
what they
Be
stand
interesting
for
that,
anymore.
you know, in Wadsworth, there's a group that formed called the 912 group. You know, there's the day after 9/11.
The Glenn Beck
and
group,
they're
yeah.
basically a Tea Party group, Patriot group. And I know one person is a neighbor of mine who's attends their meetings from time to time. But from what I see of what they put in the local paper, they're getting more concerned about local issues than national issues. But I don't know. It might be interesting to try to find somebody that could be a spokesman for that.
Patty, I know that you're a loyal Democrat, but I would have to ask the question, do you think that it is healthy in our country for people to vote just on those labels without any idea what they stand for? Republican,
Oh,
Democrat?
absolutely not. It's definitely not healthy.
Yeah.
You need to vote for the candidate that represents your values and your opinions. There's no perfect candidate out there. As you know, Bryan mentioned the flawed candidates. There is no unflawed candidate available that I know of that could come out.
I've told people I'm looking for a president, not a messiah.
Yeah, exactly. So they are all. I guess you have to look at the one that most matches your values. You know, we talk about the two-party system, but you can't just automatically go to a three-party or four-party. There's so many things that have to change in order to do that. The Electoral College, you know, we had a big discussion on this last week, is set up for a two-party system. It's not set up so that you have any way of an independent or third party to get votes. The amount of money and national coordination that's required to put on a national campaign. There is no third party that has that type of mechanism in place that would allow for them to be elected. And that's part of our campaign finance, that it prevents that. You also have to look at third party candidates in that many cases they are single issue parties. They're not looking at all of the issues that affect all of us. You know, take for example the Green Party. And I know a lot of Bernie supporters are saying that they're going to go with the Green Party. And Dr. Jill Stein, I believe is the name of the lady, and her big push is for all of the eco subjects. But then you look into her background a little further, and she's got some really strange ideas. I mean, the one I remember in particular was that this is a doctor and she's opposed to childhood vaccinations. She's on that plane. And I'm sure when you look at some of the viewpoints she has, it really doesn't go along with what I would think the typical Bernie supporter would have, which brings out the point that with our third-party candidates, they don't have to face the scrutiny. You know, Gary Johnson is not facing the scrutiny that Donald Trump is facing.
Not yet.
And I don't know that he ever will. Now, one of the things as well that you don't face the scrutiny, but you don't get the information from them. They have the debate rule that you have to be polling at 15% in order to appear in a national debate. And that is to keep the independent. That's to keep the Ross Perot's off of the debate stage, because they really felt that hurt the first Bush in that debate. That's what cost him votes, was the fact that Perot was on that stage. So they raised the limit, made it 15%. And if for that reason, Gary Johnson, I think the highest I've seen him polling in any state is 11%. And nationally, he's not even close to that.
He's more like 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And so it's not going to happen.
But he had been -1.
That's true. The last one I think that tried to run a successful third party actually might have been Teddy Roosevelt, who, because he had the support, he had the money, and it was a different time then, but the Bull Moose Party was, his way of striking back, and he had the name, and he really did have a chance
88 electoral votes
of winning. But even with that,
then he went back to the Republican Party.
Yeah, exactly.
Scuttled the whole thing.
And he was a diehard Republican, and against the other side of the Roosevelt family, which were Democrats, of course. But there's so many things fighting against a third-party candidate. I think the best we can expect from it now, as was mentioned before, is the fact that they opened the 2 main party candidates up to ideas or push them towards positions that maybe they weren't quite there yet. Mm-hmm. But it forces them to consider those positions and incorporate that into their national plan.
Yeah, well, that's to Jerry's point.
Yeah.
That they introduce ideas that get some discussion. But how would you feel, Jerry, if we had a system that was a proportional system, like in Italy and Germany and New Zealand, I believe,
a lot of
where they will, if you got 20% of the vote, you get 20% of the representation in Parliament. Then you get to continually support those ideas. Now they're presented during an election and then forgotten for the rest of the time. But proportional representation is, would that be Perot got 20% of the vote, then his party would have 20% representation?
Yeah, 18.9.
The interesting thing on that is, and I don't quite know how that works, but I've seen it, and I'm aware of that, is that takes, you mentioned voting just for the D or the R. That means that you wouldn't be voting for your representatives, you wouldn't be voting for your senators. You would be voting for a party, period. And then that party's representatives would be put into Congress. So you couldn't vote, Democrat for president and Republican for senator. It doesn't sound like the way they're set up. Am I correct on that?
Mm-hmm. Well, what's a parliamentarian system? You vote for your local representatives, and then whoever has the most in the House of Parliament, then elects their leader. So it's kind of from a bottom up instead of a top down.
Yeah.
So Ohio, if they have so many districts, would be proportionally represented by those different parties. And
then gerrymandering could come into effect
it
horribly.
Could.
Yeah.
It could, and probably is, but I don't know. You'd have to. It would require a total different way as the way we elect our national leader, possibly.
It leads to. It looks to me, looking at history and fiction and so forth, that it leads to a lot of fractiousness within the meetings. These parties, and they're always dissolving this government and holding a new election, and all of the different deals and wheeling and dealing that goes on among all these representatives of all these minor parties to form coalitions that could have the power. Look at Israel, for example, the Likud and the rest of them. Who's going to be in charge? Which way are they going to take the country? Depending on what kind of coalitions they can form within the 3 or 4 major parties that they have. But you're right; it has to be a whole change. We've got on the very local level, we have the 2-party system. Even though, say, in Wadsworth, it doesn't make a heck of a lot of difference what your party is in our local government. particularly. You know, it's that's the way it's set up, and it has been.
Wadsworth has always had the most civil politics of any place I've known. In my 50 years in Wadsworth, I've never known the kind of scandals that go on in
Oh, there's some interesting
nearby.
ones in the area, not in Wadsworth, but in the area
Yeah,
that I've
but
seen.
I've always been
You know,
proud of the town
I
for
think
that.
Brunswick has if I'm not mistaken, they're a non-party city. You vote.
They have a city manager, not a mayor.
Right,
Their
exactly.
mayor is more of a weak, you know, more of a ceremonial mayor in Brunswick.
Yeah. Now they are Democrats and they are Republicans, but you don't vote like the top two may be both
Yeah.
Democrats or they might both be Republicans. So
City council basically appoints who the next mayor is going to be, and those, you know, there are governments, local governments throughout Ohio that do that. You know, the city council is the one that appoints the mayor for that particular
There's a
time.
TV show on this last season about little kids doing things. And he's 4 or 5 years old. He was the mayor of his town. He'd been appointed the mayor. So what do you do? I shake hands a lot.
There you go.
oh, I saw that. Yeah, yeah.
Now, that's that kind of thing.
Yeah.
A representative of the community, but no really political power.
Yeah.
Well, how would it be, though, if we had multiple parties represented in the Congress? Right now, we have a system whereby we have two parties, and the one that has the majority of seats in Congress gets to name the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House then gets to appoint all these people to different committees and appoint the chairman and all of that, and then if they don't do the Speaker's bidding, they're yanked out of those seats.
The interesting thing in that situation is the party with the most members can end up not having or having the least power because then all the minor parties group together and they have more votes and spread it out. It's fascinating when I see that. But
Well, we saw what happened with Speaker Boehner, and you know
Yeah.
the group within the Republican Party had enough votes to pretty much scuttle his speakership. you
Well, he
know.
became a bully.
Yeah, well, you know, when you're trying to build a coalition, is that a dirty word anymore? You know, building a coalition, reaching across the aisle, trying to compromise. You know, some people say, well, you know, when you compromise, you're just giving up, you know, on your own ideals. Unfortunately, we're suffering as a country because on both sides, they've hardened their positions, and all they're trying to do is get the majority in the Senate and in the House so that they can push through their stuff instead of saying, hey, let's come together. So maybe a third party would create that leaven, if you will, and say, we've got to work together.
I would go out on a limb and say if there's one thing that you can point to that accounts for the success of the United States of America, it's our ability and willingness to compromise.
you know, I find it interesting. You know, you mentioned Boehner, and you know he was thrown out, and Cantor lost out, and the man that was primarily responsible, or one of the people responsible for that, was the leader of Breitbart, who is now
Donald Trump's campaign manager, whatever you want to call it.
and who also, you know, he campaigned heavily against Paul Ryan, and wants Paul Ryan to work with him now. I just find that all
It's
intriguing.
yeah, that's a good word to put to it. I say it's crazy.
Right now, we've got 31 candidates declared for the presidency this year. 31.
You know, it's funny too because, you know, working at the polls, I remember in the primaries, people had the choice of the Republican or Democrat. They could also choose, there was a Green Party and I think Libertarian, and I'm trying to remember if there was another one. People had no idea that those parties even existed.
Oh, I know.
Because they kept saying, what do you mean Green Party? And and obviously you can't discuss it with them, but they have no idea that they even exist.
Darrell Castle, the Constitution Party. Is that who you were talking about a while ago? Yeah. And that I don't. I guess maybe even though both candidates on the Libertarian ticket were former governors, I get a little turned off by the frivolousness of the whole idea. I mean, here's a candidate for president said, if I'm elected president, I'll quit smoking pot. Is that a serious candidate?
Quite a sacrifice.
I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
Well, this election is one where I think that there's what, 87 days? How many days left?
Oh, it's
Too many.
70.
Like that.
Yeah, too many.
My phone rings constantly.
Can't come soon enough.
I have an idea the Libertarian Party is going to be heard from. I see their candidates represented or interviewed on television more than I ever expected I would. And that sometimes they make an awful lot of sense. But I have an idea it's going to be an issue this time, and it probably should be.
Of course, if the Libertarian candidate is that attractive, I think Rand Paul would have done much better in the primaries, don't you?
Yeah.
I think there were too many people present at that time.
That's
there have
true,
been
too.
less people present in those primaries.
17 was too many?
Yeah, I believe so.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. If his message would have been able to stand out from the others,
It should have, but it
because of
didn't.
number,
Yeah.
he probably would have had a bigger impact. I think.
I was surprised that he didn't do better than he did. He seemed to have a message that would resonate with a lot of people, but he was the least presidential-looking candidate on the stage, I think. And that makes a difference to people. You have
That's
to look at
The
Donald
it.
Kennedy-Nixon debate, is the first major example of that.
Yeah, if you heard it on the radio, you thought Nixon won. If you saw it on
Right.
TV, you thought Kennedy did. Because he looked a whole lot better, didn't he?
Sure did.
But it's a question of our maturity as voters. I think as voters, we've become a lot less mature. Or maybe I'm just imagining, or putting some moral strength behind our parents.
But there's hope. I have an 18-year-old granddaughter voting this time the first year. She says, "I don't know what to do." Poppy says, "I can't stand Trump. I sure don't like Hillary. I don't know what I'm going to do."
We've got one candidate that is likely to insult the entire Western world, and another one that has no identifiable conscience, at least from my point of view.
We in Sapphire quoted that when she was First Lady, said, "Our First Lady is a congenital liar." So,
Well, I've come to believe that third parties provide one more package of poll-tested comments and promises that were never meant to be kept. And that's a quote from yours truly. Thank you very much.